We've all heard the phrase crime doesn't pay, but for some it paid enough to land them in the history books. Sure, these infamous killers were more terrifying than a spider in the shower, but in hindsight, they also provide a fascinatingly bizarre look at the most dangerous characters the world has ever seen. From Victorian London's foggy streets to Russian palaces drenched in blood, let's dive into history's most notorious killers. Warning, dark humor ahead. Proceed at your own risk. 1. Jack the Ripper, the king of unsolved mysteries. Jack the Ripper, possibly the most famous murderer in history. Jack wasn't just dangerous, he was basically the Voldemort of 1880s London. His true identity? Still a mystery. And what's more terrifying than a serial killer who's still out there somewhere, maybe moonlighting as a barista? Jack's work involved terrorizing Whitechapel, cutting up his victims with surgical precision. What did the police have to say? Well, it was mostly a collective shrug and a "let's blame the immigrants." Classic, right? Jack was the kind of guy who enjoyed the limelight, as long as it didn't reveal his face. He mailed taunting letters to the authorities, signed with a playful pseudonym, like a Victorian-era influencer with a bad attitude. What's more shocking? That they never caught him, or that people still think he might have been a prince, a doctor, or even a woman in disguise? Either way, Jack gave birth to more conspiracy theories than Bigfoot. Number 2. Elizabeth Bathory, the first and worst beauty influencer. Move over, beauty bloggers. Elizabeth Bathory had the ultimate skincare hack, and let me tell you, it was disturbing. Known as the Blood Countess, she had one of history's most bizarre routines, draining young girls of their blood to bathe in it. Sure, your charcoal face mask seems extreme now, doesn't it? And while most nobles of the 16th century were content with fancy clothes and lavish parties, Elizabeth thought, why not a blood spa? Turns out, being a noblewoman meant you could get away with a lot, until you didn't. After some 600 victims, her reputation took a hit. Shocking, I know, but really, Elizabeth took drama queen to a whole new level. Imagine having to explain that beauty regime at the family dinner table. No, Mom, it's not goat milk. It's, well, peasant blood. Cue awkward silence. 3. Ted Bundy, the Casanova of serial killers. Ted Bundy had looks, charm, and a certain je ne sais quoi that made him one of the scariest killers in U.S. history. He could have been the leading man in a rom-com if it weren't for the whole serial killer thing. Ted wasn't just dangerous, he was dangerously likable. He would trick women into helping him with things like carrying books or fixing his car, and, spoiler alert, they'd end up in the trunk. Not exactly a fairy tale ending. Bundy's real crime? Giving good-looking guys everywhere a bad name. If this had happened today, Bundy would probably have had a dating app profile that read, good with tools, great with manipulation, bad with boundaries. Swipe left, please. 4. H. Holmes, the architect of death. Who says murder can't be creative? H. Holmes was basically a twisted Frank Lloyd Wright, designing what would later be known as the infamous Murder Castle in Chicago. Complete with trapdoors, hidden rooms, and secret gas chambers, Holmes' hotel was like a twisted version of Home Alone. Except the only thing people got caught in was, well, death. Guests came for the World's Fair and never left. The place had more secret passageways than a Scooby-Doo episode, but with far less comic relief. Holmes wasn't just a murderer. He was an evil entrepreneur. He'd lure victims with promises of cheap rent, only to renovate their lives into oblivion. Maybe if HGTV had been around back then, he could have gone into flipping houses instead of flipping. Get the ID. 5. Charles Manson, the guy who outsourced murder. Charles Manson might not have done the dirty work himself, but he was the CEO of one of the deadliest cults in history. Imagine if Jeff Bezos used his business skills to build a murder enterprise, and you'll get an idea of Manson's vibe. This guy convinced a group of followers to commit murders for him, because, well, why do it yourself when you can delegate? Manson's philosophy was rooted in a bizarre mix of pop culture references, including an obsession with the Beatles and an idea called Helter Skelter, which was essentially the race war equivalent of a bad acid trip. His followers, known as the Manson family, took this all very seriously, enough to murder Hollywood actress Sharon Tate and several others in cold blood. If there's one thing Manson proved, it's that you don't have to hold the knife to be a killer. Just convince a few lost souls to do it for you. Talk about teamwork. 6. Ivan the Terrible, more than just a bad nickname. Ivan IV of Russia, better known as Ivan the Terrible, wasn't content with just being a king. He wanted to be the king of bloodshed. And oh boy, did he deliver. Ivan's reign was a delightful mix of paranoia, murder, and an insatiable urge to torture just about anyone who crossed him. You know that one coworker who steals your lunch? Ivan would have executed them. But really, the guy didn't do anything halfway. He built a secret police force called the Oprichniki, whose main job was to terrorize the Russian populace. Fun fact, they rode around on black horses with dog heads strapped to their saddles. Because why not? If you're going to be terrifying, you might as well accessorize. Ivan didn't just kill, he obliterated. His own son? Oh yeah, killed him too. Father of the Year material right there. 7. Ed Gein, the DIY decorator. If Martha Stewart had a dark side, it might look a little like Ed Gein. This Wisconsin farmer wasn't content with just killing people. Oh no, that would have been too easy. Instead, he dabbled in a little home decor, using human remains. You thought your neighbor with the mismatched curtains was bad? Try stepping into Gein's living room, where you'd find lampshades made from human skin and furniture upholstered with body parts. Gein's crimes weren't just creepy. They were the stuff of nightmares, inspiring horror classics like Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So next time you complain about a bad Airbnb, just remember it could be worse. You could have stayed at Ed Gein's house. 8. Albert Fish, Grandpa's Got Issues. Albert Fish looked like your typical grandpa, soft-spoken, gray-haired, and harmless. But trust me, you wouldn't want him babysitting your kids. Nicknamed the Brooklyn Vampire and the Boogeyman, Fish was as twisted as they come. He didn't just commit murders. He added a horrifying gourmet twist. Yes, Fish indulged in cannibalism, making Hannibal Lecter look like a picky eater. He would send letters to the families of his victims, proudly detailing the meals he prepared. Imagine getting that in the mail. Dear Sir, your child was quite tender and delicious. Talk about next-level dinner conversations. Fish was the kind of man who believed pain was a form of art. He even used needles to create his own personal acupuncture session by sticking them into his body. His crimes were so disturbing that even the most seasoned police officers reportedly needed a stiff drink after hearing his confessions. Fish didn't just walk into the world of serial killers. He pirouetted in, leaving a trail of horror that still makes even the darkest corners of true crime podcasts squirm. 9. Aileen Wuornos, the Roadside Avenger. Let's shift gears a little with Aileen Wuornos, America's most infamous female serial killer. Her story? It's almost like a Shakespearean tragedy, but with more highway truckers and a lot less poetic language. Aileen's life was marked by hardship from the get-go, and by the time she hit her 30s, she decided that enough was enough. So, she did what any person pushed to the edge would do. She became a highway prostitute turned serial killer. A tale as old as time, right? Wuornos didn't just kill for the fun of it, though fun probably wasn't out of the question. She claimed it was self-defense against clients who tried to assault her. Aileen's method? A quick, dirty execution on the side of Florida highways. It was all very Wild West meets the gas station bathroom. Her case, immortalized by Charlize Theron in Monster, brings up a lot of complicated feelings. Was she a cold-blooded killer or a victim who snapped? Either way, I wouldn't ask for a ride from her. Number 10. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Who liked heavy metal? If you think the scariest thing about the 1980s was the neon spandex, you clearly haven't met Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker. Ramirez had a terrifying resume of crimes ranging from burglaries to murder. His calling card? Showing up in the dead of night, uninvited, like the world's worst Airbnb guest who also happened to worship Satan. Oh, and let's not forget his taste in music. Heavy metal. Imagine headbanging while breaking and entering. Ramirez was living that chaotic metalhead lifestyle before it was cool. What made him even creepier? Ramirez's fans. During his trial, he had women sending him love letters and showing up in court to swoon over him. What's more romantic than a man who strolls into your life at 2 a.m., leaves you tied up, and then goes through your jewelry box? Ramirez wasn't just a killer. He was a media sensation, a kind of celebrity for the truly unhinged. But let's be clear, not even a killer soundtrack could excuse his crimes. 11. Jeffrey Dahmer, the guy who took having friends over for dinner too far. If there were ever a king of awkward dinner parties, Jeffrey Dahmer would take the crown. Dahmer's idea of having someone for dinner wasn't about hospitality, it was cannibalism. He was the type of guy who gave Hannibal Lecter a run for his money. Dahmer didn't just stop at murder. He went full-on mad scientist, experimenting with body parts, trying to create a living zombie. You know, the usual hobbies. But Dahmer's reign of terror wasn't limited to just killing. Oh no, he got creative. His fridge wasn't stocked with leftover pizza like the rest of us. It was a horror show of dismembered body parts. And let's just say no one ever wanted to come over for a late-night snack. His crimes shocked the world, and his calm, unassuming demeanor during his trial left people wondering, how does a guy who looks like an accountant end up being one of the most horrific killers of all time? 12. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown. If you thought clowns were scary before, wait until you hear about John Wayne Gacy. Gacy wasn't just a murderer, he was a part-time clown for children's birthday parties. That's right. Pogo the Clown was out there making balloon animals by day and burying bodies in his crawl space by night. The guy turned creepy clown from an irrational fear to a very real nightmare. Gacy's routine was chillingly simple. He would lure young men and boys to his home with promises of construction work or some innocent fun, only for them to meet a grisly end. With 33 victims, Gacy buried most of them beneath his house. Imagine the property value on that place. Gacy's trial revealed the truly chilling duality of a man who could entertain kids with magic tricks and, in the same breath, become one of the most prolific killers in U.S. history. Pennywise has nothing on this guy. A gallery of gruesome bayonet. In the grand hall of dangerous killers, these monsters stand out not just for their body counts but for their sheer bizarreness. Whether it's bathing in blood, luring victims with charm, or throwing murder parties in hidden hotels, each of these killers left a twisted legacy that still haunts history books and true crime podcasts alike. And while we might laugh at the absurdity of it all from a safe distance, one thing's for sure, these killers remind us that truth is often stranger and more terrifying than fiction.